Hello everyone and welcome in the next episode of our interview series. My name is Stanimir Sutirov and I'm head of the projects of the foundation. Today I will replace our CEO Martin Berneberg, who is not able to join us. Together with me as always is our president Oliver Lehmann. Hello Oliver, it's nice to see you.
Hi Stan.
We are happy to introduce our guest today, Dr. David Hillson, also known as the Risk Doctor. He is an international thought leader in risk management with a global reputation as an excellent speaker and award-winning author. He has spoken about risk around the world, from major conferences with thousands of delegates to small group meetings and in-house teams. David's speaking and writing activities are guided by the Risk Doctor motto, understand, sorry, can you say it because it's yours and I prefer you to say it.
Of course, thank you. And thank you very much for your welcome. The Risk Doctor motto is understand profoundly so you can explain simply. So we do the deep thinking and then try and communicate things in a way that's easier to understand.
Yeah, fully agree with this. Welcome. We're happy to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
David, people know you as the Risk Doctor. Can you tell us the story behind this name?
Yes, it's a great name, isn't it? Everybody knows the Risk Doctor, and easy to remember and quite catchy. So quite often I meet people and they know, oh, you're the Risk Doctor, but they don't know my real name. Which is sometimes a disadvantage. But it's a great name because the doctor idea tells you about consulting. You go to the doctor when you have a problem, when you want to solve your problem, but also you go to the doctor if you want advice on how to stay healthy. And so what I'm trying to do through the Risk Doctor picture is to give an impression, give the idea of a trusted professional, somebody you can go to if you want advice with some difficulties that you have, but also somebody who can help you to stay healthy. And actually, one of the books I wrote, it's this one here, The Risk Doctor's Cures for Common Risk Ailments. What this does is takes the idea of 10 common risk diseases and diagnoses them, gives you the symptoms and some treatment, and also, as I say, talks about how to stay risk healthy. So that's the idea behind the Risk Doctor, and it's served me very well for the last 20 years.
The older we get, the more ailments we have.
Yes, but also the more wisdom in knowing how to deal with them and avoid them. Hopefully.
Yeah, ask my wife. She will tell you something different about me.
Maybe.
We had some brief talk before our interview, and we talked about project business, what is project business management, and you have experience as well in that. Can you tell us a bit about your experience with not just project management, but project business and project business management?
Yes, it actually goes back a long way before we had the term project business. And in 1983, I started working as a junior project manager in the UK for a defence engineering company. And all of our work was delivered through projects. And after a little while, I was running a project office. And then we introduced risk management into the project office in 1984. So right from the beginning, I had direct experience of delivering value through projects to our organization and our stakeholders, but also using contractors and suppliers and quite a long supply chain, quite a complex supply chain in order to deliver that. And so well before we had the idea of project business, my experience was directly in that area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. I want to guide a little bit in different direction. You know, people nowadays saying that you need to have agile mindset for to guiding the project on agile way. I want to look from your perspective to this. In order to deal more successful with a risk in the project, do you think that it's a good to develop a risk mindset? Because
yes,
our role as a project managers is to keep the project balanced, and as a part of this balance, we can develop risk mindset. What do you think about this?
Yes, I think it's very important. The way that we think determines how we act. And so if we don't think correctly about risk, then our risk management actions, the way we behave towards risk, is not likely to be effective. So I think it's very important that we adopt the right mindset towards risk. And I've done some thinking and some writing about this, and it's something that I hope to be developing a little bit further in the future. I think there are a number of principles that we need to get clear in our thinking about risk. So, for example, just to mention two or three, risk is absolutely natural. You know, we can't avoid risk in any area of life, and we have to recognize that is also true in project businesses. Not only is risk natural, but it's manageable. So we're not victims. We can do something about risk. And we also have to recognize, and we'll perhaps talk about this a little bit later, that not all risk is bad. And that's a key part of our risk mindset in terms of that balance. So risk is a natural part of life, but it is something that we can deal with. And if we embrace it, then we can use it to create value. So I think the way that we think is really important. I have a little saying, attitude affects actions, beliefs affect behavior, culture influences conduct. So these kind of soft things shape the way that we act towards risk. And if we don't think correctly, then I think we have no hope of having correct and effective management of risk.
So David, there was a request that you show your book again. Can you show the book again? And author again? I think author is simple.
Okay, I'm not here to sell books, but The Risk Doctor's Cures for Common Risk Ailments, and it is just authored by me. So it was published by, who was it published by? Routledge, I think now own this one. But if you go to the Risk Doctor website, risk-doctor.com, under writing, you'll find all the details of the books.
Okay, great. When we talk about project business, again, project business is high-risk business. It's one of our most important statements at the Project Business Foundation, because you called it multi-level risks. There are so many different forms of risks or levels of risk that add up with each other. We have project risk, there's, as with any other project, but we also have commercial risk. We have legal risks, yeah, and this is probably not a complete list. There can be many more because we have interfaces between two or more organizations, sometimes many more than two organizations. Yeah. What is your recommendation to specifically manage these risks?
I think it's really important because often in the world of project risk management, and if you look at the guidelines from PMI or from IPMA, or even from the Institute of Risk Management, when we talk about managing risk in projects, we think about risk in projects. So you take the project as a boundary and you say, within the project, within my organization, I need to manage risk in here. But if we have a project business and the project extends from in here to out there, and then we have have a supply chain, or we have other contractors involved, then clearly there is risk out there as well as in here. And the standard approach to project risk management is within a self-contained boundary very often. And I think that misses a huge number of the potential sources of risk on our organization or that can affect our project. One of the things I developed in 2002 was the risk breakdown structure. And it was intended as a hierarchical organization of sources of risk. And it has 4 high-level sources of risk. So all risks come from a source. The main sources are management risks, technical risks, commercial risks, and external risks. And then under each of those 4 headings, we have more detailed sub-sources of risk under each of those headings, which might be specific to the organization or the industry or the business area. But I think it's very important that we look over there when we're thinking about risks in a project business. And you mentioned a very important word, Oliver, that's the word interfaces, because we have to manage the risk across the interface. And how we do that is often not well understood or not well thought through, because our approach to project risk management is in here. And as long as I manage my part, and then over the interface, I suppose they manage their part, then everything will be well, we think. But what we ought to be doing is thinking much more carefully about risk across the interface.
That's an interesting thing that you're just talking about, because I was the focus person in an interview some days ago, and we talked about connective leadership. And connective leadership is the concept that as a leader, you're not just limited to the boundaries of the own organization, but you lead into another organization. And in the other organization, there are also leaders, and they lead into your organization, and you accept that and you allow that. It's not the strict borderline where you say, this is my empire and that's the end of my empire and there is someone else's empire. They start to overlap and the domains of influence overlap. And some leaders see this negatively, but some leaders enjoy that and say, hey, that's great because we can connect as leaders as well there. So it's not only a leadership task, it's also a risk management task.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we mustn't constrain our thinking to just the risks that are within our own area of responsibility. If we're thinking about risks to a project, and we might talk about this definition a little later, but any uncertainty that can affect my project objectives is something I need to know about and be prepared to manage, even if it's in somebody else's area of responsibility. So this idea of looking across the interface, I think, is really important. And we have a couple of phrases that are used quite freely, which I think speak to this. One is risk transfer, and the other is risk sharing. And they're really two sides of the same coin. What we don't want to do, though, often people think with risk transfer, you throw the risk over the fence and hope that somebody catches it and deals with it. But the idea of risk sharing is to recognize that we have a shared interest in the success of our project, the prime contractor and the subcontractors and the supply chain. And so we need to share responsibility for managing risk, whether it's my side of the interface or your side or both sides. And so the idea of risk sharing is really looking over and saying, well, what's happening over here? How is that going to affect me here? Mm-hmm. Can I help you in terms of managing the risk together? Mm-hmm. And you asked about recommendations. We used to have a contract form years ago called the target cost incentivized contract. Do you remember that? With pain share and gain share?
I remember
have a target price.
Yeah.
And the idea was if we came in under the price, we shared the saving. But if we went over the price, we shared the additional cost. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting concept. Do you remember that, Oliver?
I know that. Yeah, Americans love it with a ceiling in. So then you have this point of total assumption, PTA, and so on. A lot of people ask me about that. The funny thing, I never had this in real life. I know it from third party, because in Germany it's not in use. We don't have it here. Yeah. So. Yeah. I had some experience with British companies in the past, automotive industry, and with American companies, but there we didn't use that. I think it's very much in a public environment, in a government environment.
Well, yes, it's originally. So we have the public-private partnership, the PPP arrangement. But somebody I saw asked the question, what was the name of that contract type? I'll say again, it's a target cost incentivized contract. So we go for a target cost, and then we incentivize all parties to meet that cost by saying if we're cheaper, then we share the gain, and that's an incentive. That's a positive thing. But also, if we go over, then we'll share the additional cost. So we're incentivizing people to hit the target. So target cost incentivized. But I think what I started doing back in 1984, when I was working in this project business years and years ago, was to start specifying risks across the boundary. And so what we did in our contracts with our suppliers and our contractors was we identified shared risks, and then we talked about them in advance, we priced them, and we put them in the contract. And then we said, and there were 16 major risks in one particular contract I was managing. Each risk had a price. If it happens, it's going to cost this much to deal with. And it had an owner. Either we're going to deal with it or you're going to deal with it. And then we agreed together whether we would take the risk or not take the risk. And if we took a risk that was ours, that is to say the prime contractor, then that wasn't in the price to the supplier because we were carrying the risk. But if they took a risk and we agreed with it, then we added to the price that we would pay them because they were taking the risk. And so we had 16 priced risks that were consciously shared across the boundary with our key contractor. And that really worked very well. And I think we could use that kind of approach still today.
If you as the customer, as a prime contractor, you're the customer of the subcontractor. If you as the customer are prepared to do that, I think that's a very good way to go. I would see difficulties with some companies I'm aware of, if I am the contractor and they are the customer, to convince them to put a price on risk, because their understanding is normally quite simple. At least in Germany, we have this tradition of the fixed price contract. Wherever you go, most contracts here are fixed price contract. That's our tradition. And so they say, oh, no, it's all your risk. Yeah, it's fixed price, so it's your risk. Yeah, and just take it. And we take the supplier with the cheapest fixed price, maybe, or something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
but you have to protect yourself with a fixed price contract. And so when you're pricing as a supplier or as the contractor to the client, you have to price in the risks that they're expecting you to take. And that puts the price up. Yeah. And then you have to have a negotiation. So I think it's certainly better, it's more mature if you can put these things on the table and actually talk about them with numbers, with probabilities, with ownership and transparency, and then agree together, you will manage this better than we will. We would like you to take it, and then it won't be in the price. We can manage this better than you will, so we will take it and it will be in the price. And we agree that. And I think what we have to do in terms of managing across the interface, the other key thing here is and Stan talked about risk mindset, is to ensure there's a shared risk mindset across the interface, that we agree together what we mean by risk and how we're going to manage it. And we have matching levels of maturity, both in our understanding of risk and also in our processes for managing it. And very often the problem across the interface is that one side is much more mature than the other. And so you can have either a client who understands risk very well, and then they subcontract work to somebody who doesn't really deal with it, and then you have problems, or the other way around, where, as you say, the client may say, well, we don't take risk, we're a prime contractor, you can do all that. And they don't understand that ultimately, as the owner of the objectives of the product, they will ultimately end up owning the risk. So it does matter to them. And I think we need to share this risk culture, this risk mindset across the interface. It's really important.
But to avoid the situation, your risk, your problem. Okay.
Well, yes, but also, risk represents not always a problem. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or a little bit later, but there are different ways of thinking about risk. And if you manage risk effectively, actually, it can give you a benefit rather than a problem.
Mm. I was thinking to ask you about your definition of the project risk, which is uncertainty that matters. Can you tell us more about what this means?
Yes, uncertainty that matters. This came out of our motto to understand profoundly so you can explain simply. And very early on in my risk management career, when I was just a child, 30 years ago, because I'm really not as old as I look. It's not possible, is it, Oliver, that we could be as old as we look? Young at heart, that's the important thing.
That's important.
But I was thinking very deeply about the philosophy of risk and the nature of risk and different types of risk and so on. And came to the understanding very early on that risk is not the same as uncertainty. All risks are uncertain, but not all uncertainties are risks. Because if you think about the number of uncertainties in the world or in the universe, there are billions. But you think about the number of risks in my risk register, there are not billions, maybe tens, 100 maybe, but certainly fewer than billions of uncertainties. So clearly risk is a subset of uncertainty. But how do you decide whether an uncertainty is a risk or not? What we have to recognize is that most of the uncertainties in the universe don't matter. And what we want to know is, what are the uncertainties that matter, and how do we know what matters? What matters are the uncertainties that, if they happened, could affect our objectives. So we use objectives, project objectives or business objectives, as a filter for the big universe of uncertainty to say, filter it through my objectives, if it doesn't affect my objectives, I don't care. That uncertainty could happen or not happen. It really doesn't matter to me. But the uncertainties that could affect my objectives, I need to know what they are. I need to know how likely they are, how big they are, whether they're good or bad, and then what can I do about them, and who's the right person to manage them, and so on. So we need to know and understand and manage the uncertainties that matter and ignore the ones that don't matter. And the filter that we use is our project objectives. Now, this comes back to the question of managing across the interface, because very often the prime contractor and the subcontractor have different objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have different objectives, then you have different risks. So something which could be a risk to the client may not be a risk to the contractor because they have different objectives. Maybe the client wants to get breaking into a new market as quickly as possible, and maybe the contractor wants to maximize their profit or wants to ensure some continued work in the future. And then we have a mismatch of objectives, and we have a mismatch of understanding of risk. Yeah. And that's why we need to speak clearly and be transparent across the interface to understand what each other's objectives are and how we bring those into coherence as we manage the project business together. So uncertainty that matters, I think, is a useful starting point. It's not a complete definition, but it's a concept. It's a kind of pre-definition. And everything else follows from that. So we might say, for example, that risk has two dimensions. It has an uncertainty dimension and a mattering dimension. And we might say how uncertain it is, we describe using words like probability or frequency. And how much it matters, we describe using words like impact or consequence. So you have a two-dimensional view of risk: uncertainty that matters, probability and impact, chance and consequence. And so that idea of what the nature of risk is comes out of that very simple three-word definition.
I think it's a great definition. I think it's a filter. More a filter that you say there are so many uncertainties. Which are the uncertainties that matter? By the way, I saw a risk register with 300 items in, but they were filtered again. Which of them do really matter? Which of these risks do we want to know more? Do we want to do some analysis? Think about how we deal with them, with reserves in place or with avoidance methods and whatever it is. So I think it's a very, very good definition, and it's very helpful here. I have another question, and this is about the people involved. You already talked about people, attitudes, behavior, consequences. I remember this from an older book of you, ABC of Risk Psychology. I think that was the term.
Yes, that's right.
ABC of Risk Psychology. Yeah, I read your books as well, as you see.
I'm very impressed.
Time that you read my books, by the way.
Yeah, maybe I should.
There are people in many organizations who reject discussing risks, talking about risks. Yeah, they say risks is a sign of weakness. It's scaremongering. It is distraction of what they are going to do, and so on. It's the waste of time. Yeah. Those in our audience who have this problem, what advice would you give them if they are in contact with people like that, and if they get blocked by people like that?
Yeah. Well, I think there are lots of things we could say. Let me start by going back to the idea of uncertainty that matters and say that there are two big ways in which uncertainties can matter. There are two big categories of risk. And uncertainty can matter if it has the potential to hurt us. So if it would cost extra money or delay us or damage reputation or reduce performance or have a safety impact, kill people, that kind of uncertainty matters because it could hurt us badly. But there are other uncertainties that matter, things that if they happened, they could help us. An uncertainty that if it occurred would save time or save money or enhance performance or improve reputation. And so we have two types of uncertainty, bad ones and good ones. And we call those threats and opportunities. And so from the concept of uncertainty that matters, you get the idea that there are bad risks and good risks, that risk is a double-sided concept, that it includes threat and opportunity. So for people who say, we're not interested in risk management is a waste of time, we don't want to recognize risk in our projects, we want a no risk, a zero risk project if possible, what they're doing is denying themselves the possibility of understanding and managing uncertainties that could save time and save money and enhance performance and increase benefits and improve reputation and improve safety. All of those good things, they're denying themselves because those things are also in the scope of risk management. So risk management in this concept has two purposes: minimize threats and maximize opportunities. And I would say to somebody, if you don't want to have risk in your project, you're never going to make any money. You're never going to improve your market share. You're never going to innovate. You're never going to be creative, because you can only do those things by taking risks and by embracing those risks in order to create value. So yes, of course, we have to be careful and minimize the things that could hurt us, but we also have to be brave and engage with risk and maximize those things that could help us and go and grab them. So we kill the threats and we capture the opportunities, and that way we maximize the value that we create for our stakeholders. So that's my first question, my first part of the answer. But the second part of the answer is going back to this idea of the risk mindset. You know, risk is natural. Risk is actually unavoidable. We cannot, we can't do anything with no risk. Even if you stayed at home and wrapped yourself in a blanket and kept your head down, you never went. There's a risk there. There's a risk of doing nothing as much as a risk of doing something. So we always have to take risk. The only choice we have is which risks do we take? And then once we take them, how do we manage them? And the best thing to do is to take a risk with your eyes open, not to go around like this and, oh, I've walked into something now, but to actually see the risks, decide which ones we're going to avoid, and decide which ones we're going to engage with. So I see risk management like a radar that scans the future, and it says, what's out there coming in my direction? Oh, there's a big bad thing over there. I'll go in this way and I'll move out of the way of the bad thing so it passes me by. But also as I scan the future, oh, here's a good thing. I'll move towards that good thing and make sure I capture it. So what we're doing is taking risk to minimize threats, maximize opportunities, and maximize the value that we can create. So I would encourage people to say, yes, of course, we don't want bad things to happen, but we do want good things to happen. And that involves taking risk. Yeah.
I like one example that Oliver gave us a few days ago. And I will pass this question to him to explain more. But Oliver, can you ask our guests about the problems during the COVID when some of the customers delay payments and some of the contractors do not deliver?
Yeah.
Can you give this example with Daimler to our audience also?
As part
Like
of
example.
our private discussion as an introduction. A German car manufacturer, there are several, as you know, their CEO sent a letter to employees telling them to pay back invoices, to pay invoices late. This company is at the moment in a crisis, and they are short of liquid money, so they try to keep their liquidity up. In automotive, which is an industry that I know very well because that's where my roots are. In automotive, there is a type of project that you find not in many other industries. At the moment, I'm more in aerospace. They don't know it, for instance. It's a freebie project. Freebie project means, as a contractor, I do development work for my customer. The customer gets something very specific developed, some kind of component, complex component. It's expensive development. Development may take several years to be done, and the customer does not pay for that. The payment for the contractor comes when the customer buys these components, because the customer needs the components for the final car. the contractor has the drawings and the bills of materials and all those things, so knows how to make it, has the production facilities in place, so the customer is now dependent on the contractor. That's a freebie project. It's a bit strange as a customer project because you don't get paid during the project, you get the payment afterwards. I never saw it in defense, I never saw it in aerospace. There the development would be too expensive for the contractors. But in automotive industry, it's a normal process to work like that. Yeah. Now the problem is when these contractors get invoices paid late, they have two problems. One problem is to fund their ongoing work. They have running costs, they have a running income, and they have to lay out money for their running costs. But they also have already laid out money for the project at the very beginning, before the income started. And of course, they need the money to be able to do new development for this customer, and maybe also for other customers. So it's a double whammy. Yeah? It's not only that you have an operational problem, you have a problem funding your own project. That was the example. Stan, what is your question?
That's my question. What is your recommendation to both sides in this situation? I mean, I've been there from the contractor side when I'm getting my payments with half year late, and for me that's already spent money, despite the fact that I take them at some point in time. How you can manage this risk to not getting money for your work on time?
Yes, it's normal business practice to invoice early and pay late. And that's why we have 15-day, 30-day, 60-day terms, which we agree to. So we have to recognize that there is a normal business practice there. And as part of our negotiation, we need to be shortening, if we're the supplier or the contractor, shorten the payment terms, and make sure then that we have sufficient liquidity and contingency and cash flow available to cover what we've signed up to. So paying, invoicing early, paying late within the terms is normal business. Having a policy of paying later than the terms is bad practice. It's unethical. It needs to be called out and challenged. And this depends, of course, on the relationship between the contractor and the client as to how well you can do that. But we have to recognize that those payment terms are a normal part of business, and we should be accounting for them in part of our sort of business planning cycle anyway. On the question of the freebie project, really, that's no different from an organization or a company that develops products in innovation, that just says, well, we don't have a market, we don't have a customer, we're going to develop this on spec, at risk. And then once we've created something which is brilliant and world-changing and valuable and useful, then we'll sell it. But that means you have to have the funds and the resources and the skills available and the time to be able to do that. And so in the context of the automotive freebie project, I would encourage them to treat that as an innovation R&D project, just like ordinary other innovation companies would do. But in terms of this, the kind of the culture, which I think is the real problem, it's very difficult because we have to move away from that kind of competitive and conflicting culture that says, I'm going to get what I want and make you suffer, to a more collaborative and partnership arrangement, which says we all want the same thing. We all want the project to succeed. We want to sell millions. We want to make a huge profit. We want customers to be delighted and come back. And that involves all of us, from the client and all of the suppliers and contractors. And so the best way to do that is to be transparent and collaborative and to develop a partnership. Now, that then goes back, as you were saying, Oliver, to the people, because some people in their culture or in their personality are much more driven and others are softer and more embracing. And so we have to find a way of managing, again, across the interface. And this interface is absolutely crucial to managing the culture across the interface, the personalities, the attitudes either side. And that requires a degree of emotional literacy, the ability to understand yourself and other people, and to influence without authority, to influence without manipulation, but to influence in a way that helps us all reach our goals. The way that you were describing is a lose-lose situation. What we really want is, and of course the client thinks it's a win-lose, I win, you lose. But if your supplier or your contractor loses, ultimately you lose too. Because if they go out of business or they can't do these developments for you, then you don't get the product that you need. You don't get the components that you need. So you have to keep them in business. And so we do need to recognize this collaborative partnership win-win arrangement is really the only way to do business. And I think that is a culture change within business that might take some time to develop. But we can all play our part in the contracts that we're involved in, making sure that we have partnership relationships with our clients and with our contractors across the interface, and that we're being emotionally intelligent, influencing on our side and their side, even if we don't have authority, in order to reach, that shared goal.
At the Project Business Foundation, we call that completing over competing. Yeah.
Very good.
This mindset. Nice. And the basis for that is trust, mutual trust. And trust, again, is based on trustworthiness. And the interesting thing, I believe, is trust is the strongest booster for projects to be speedy, to be on time, to be fast, strong. There's no stronger booster than trust. But if you trust the wrong people, then they will crush you and your project. So you have to do it with care.
But you would only trust them once. You trust somebody once, and if they fail you, you don't trust them again. So trust has to be earned and continually renewed. And I think you're right. That's the biggest foundation of this collaborative shared win-win relationship is mutual trust. You're absolutely right.
I remember when I was in business, in automotive business, when we had a customer like that who did a similar thing, delaying payments and telling employees to delay. That's the point. Telling employees to delay payments. When we had that, we changed to payment in advance immediately, because the impression we had was this company is on the way out of business, and we don't want to have open invoices when they are illiquid. So we turned to, and the funny thing is, I had not a single case lost by that time. They all paid in advance and did that because I think other suppliers made the same. So it's a very dangerous thing for an organization to send out such a letter. I would never do that.
You get a short-term gain, but I think long-term it damages the relationship, and it's not good for the business.
That's exactly the point. But we also have a positive example here, and that's the development of the first COVID vaccine, which is obviously on the last mile.
Yes.
It will still take some time to make it and to distribute it and for many other things. But to me, it is the biggest success of project business in the last couple of years, maybe the biggest I can remember. In record time to develop such a vaccine out of nothing in the end. A brand new virus. It did not exist a year ago, at least not in the labs, and where, so that you could develop a vaccine for that. And if you look, we know of two companies involved. One is a German company, BioNTech. The other one is an American company, Pfizer. We know that German government provided funding for that. And I don't have the details, but I know the industry also quite well. And I think they had lots of other organizations involved. This was a highly complex project supply network, not just two companies. This was a project supply network, which was very well developed, very fast, very quick. And today came the news that the second organization is now there. And again, this is biotechnology. This means you have highly complex project supply networks with laboratories in and many other kinds of companies. So we have a positive side as well. What can be achieved if you have trustworthy people and organizations trusting each other? How can we multiply that?
Yes, I think there's a number of things here. Clearly, there's a lot of money put in.
Yes.
And governments and organizations just poured money in. And that is very unusual. That isn't normal. And so we can't expect to replicate that for a normal innovation project, for, let's say, green energy, or for electric batteries for electric cars. We're not going to see that whole level of sort of government massive investment in the way we have for the COVID vaccine. But I think that the pharmaceutical industry will learn from this, and the 6 to 10 year life cycle for developing a vaccine will be shortened. We will have as normal a 2-year development cycle because they've shown they can do it. And so there's a money side, but there's also a practical process side in terms of acceleration, which will be really useful for the world in future in dealing with future diseases. But I'm not sure how much we can learn or generalize from the COVID vaccine story simply because of the level of government investment and that sort of gut level drive to fix it. Because you have millions and millions of cases and millions, well, what is it, 500,000 deaths around the world. These are huge numbers and visceral at the gut level. We know we have to fix this, and there's that real drive, a survival drive, which I think is making this happen, which we won't get for normal innovation projects. So it's very hard to replicate. When you have a crisis and everybody pulls together and they cut corners and they deal with things that they're working 7 days a week and 24 hours and multiple shifts. Of course, there's a crisis. We do that. Then the crisis is over. You need to relax. You need to take a deep breath and say, okay, what can we learn for normal practice? Mm-hmm. And if you try and continue in crisis mode forever, eventually you burn out and you crash. We just can't do it. So there are some things to learn, but I would be wary of trying to say, well, everything can be done in the COVID vaccine mode. It's not going to happen, I don't think.
So
do you think that's too pessimistic? Do you think maybe we should aim for...
I'm with you, but I think we can learn some lessons. There are lessons that we can learn from it. One lesson that I saw is you cannot do perfect management during crisis management. There is perfect management, maybe there is, I don't know. But if there is perfect management, it is definitively not at a time of crisis. Crisis management is never perfect. You will always make lots of mistakes during crisis management. And you have to accept that and to a degree, tolerate that as well. Yeah.
And of course, this is where risk management becomes important.
Exactly.
Because you have to have a good risk process in advance, which enables you to deal with the failures and to be flexible and to be agile and to recognize that, of course, we're going to make mistakes, but when we make mistakes, not if, but when, this is how we recover. And this is what we do in order to protect ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so that sort of risk management mindset and practice as normal practice, when we're in crisis mode, then we use all of our risk management strategies in order to make sure we survive.
Is there a link between risk management and error tolerance?
I don't know. I hadn't really thought in that way. What do you think? I'll be thinking about it. You tell me what you think.
It was just a thought that crossed my mind when you talked about that risk management and crisis management. I think there must be a link between risk management. I think you cannot do risk management without being, to some degree, error tolerant. When managers reject risk management, this is a statement that they have zero error tolerance.
Right. Okay. I understand what you mean now. Yes. In terms of contingency and backup and fallbacks and so on, I think those are a natural part of the risk management approach. Yes.
Yeah. Steve Jobs. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah. I would like to keep you, David, in this COVID area a little bit more. And I would like to ask you one question. According to you, how big is the risk today? Having in mind the current situation in the world, and is it bigger than before, or can we say that the risk management will change forever after the COVID crisis?
It's a very interesting question. Is the world more risky now than it was before? How do you measure the size of risk? When you say more risky, what do you mean? So if we say risk is uncertainty that matters, then to be more risky, something has to be more uncertain, or it has to matter more, or both. So is there more uncertainty in the world than there ever was? I don't think so. I just think we're seeing more of it. There were always uncertainties that we never saw. You know, we call these black swans sometimes, or we call them unknowable or unknown unknowns. You know, there are uncertainties are out there. We're just not looking in the right place. So we don't see those uncertainties. I think the world is as uncertain as it ever was. We're perhaps a little more aware of it. And then do those uncertainties matter more now after COVID or during COVID? I don't think so. I think still in businesses that have objectives, strategic and project objectives, business objectives, the uncertainties could still have the same level of impact. I don't think the impact is necessarily higher. So I think we might be more aware of some risks in some areas, but I don't think the world or the universe has got more risky. I think there's the same level of uncertainty and the same level of potential impact, both good or bad, on the objectives in our businesses. So I would be more positive or confident or relaxed about saying risk management is as important as it was before. Yes, we've got a crisis, but we have crisis management to deal with that, and we're dealing with it reasonably well. But when we get back into normal business mode, I think risk management will continue to do the great job it's always done.
Yeah, the point was when we go back to normal business mode, as you said, when you consider the risks in your projects, do you think that someone will say, okay, but have in mind that COVID can happen again, or something like COVID can happen again? Like Oliver said, with delay payments and rejections for payments, things like this. That was my point.
Here's another interesting question. Is the COVID pandemic a risk? Was it ever a risk? And the answer is no. The COVID pandemic was a certainty. We have known for 100 years since the Spanish flu of 1918 that there could be a global coronavirus pandemic. And we had the Asian flu in 1957. We've had SARS, we've had MERS, we've had all of these things, bird flu, swine flu, all of these different coronaviruses have come, and we know for certain there's going to be another one. So to say, should I have pandemic on my risk register? Of course not. It should be in your standard business continuity plan, not in your risk register, because we know there's going to be another one. We just don't know when it will be and how big it will be. But that's why we have business continuity, which is a type of risk management, but not the whole risk management piece. So no, I don't think we should have global pandemic in every risk register for every project in the future, because it's not a risk. It's a part of the context, part of the environment within which we're operating, within which we're living as human beings on this earth. And so we just have to recognize it as one of those characteristics of life. It's the same as the asteroid. Will the asteroid hit the Earth? Well, one day an asteroid will hit the Earth. It's going to happen eventually, because there are millions of these things and they keep coming. One day one of them will hit us. The question is, will it be during the lifetime of my project? And so I've got a 6-month project or a 2-year project. Will the asteroid, I don't know. Will the global pandemic arrive again? There'll be another wave of COVID-19 in the next 6 months. I'm telling you now. And so we have, not in the risk register, but in our business continuity plans, we have to plan for it. We know it's going to happen. And so these, I think, are emotive questions, and we need to be a bit more analytical about them and recognize, where is the uncertainty, and what is the role, what is the scope of risk management, and what is part of normal business planning.
Do we need a third dimension for risk management? That's urgency. I always miss urgency in risk management methods. I think it's a very important dimension.
Absolutely. Is it here? I have a guide. Oh, I won't show you. I have a guide called Prioritizing Project Risks, and it has 8 factors, which are important when we prioritize risk, and urgency is one of them. We might call it proximity. There are a number of time-related factors. How soon might it happen? How quickly do we have to act? Now,
Yes.
these are time-related factors. Then we have other things like connectedness. If this happens, does it make other things happen? We have manageability. You know, if it happens, can I do something about it? There's lots of different factors, not just probability and impact. And it depends on the depth of analysis that you want to do. For most risks, it's enough to say, how likely is it to happen? And if it happens, how bad will it be or how good will it be? And from those two dimensions, we can size the risk and we can prioritize it.
Yeah.
But for the really big ones, the ones which are showstoppers or which are existential risks for our organization, we also need to think about proximity and propinquity and urgency and manageability and connectedness and all these strategic fit, all of these other dimensions.
Yeah.
But for most risks, I would think the two dimensions are probably enough. Urgency is important, you're right.
I have a very nice statement here from Alenka Gruden from Slovenia, good friend of mine. Alenka, hi. And she wrote, usually I handle two risk registers. One is a joint one with a customer, and the other one is for internal purposes.
Yes.
That's a very good one. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I was doing that in 1985. And the interesting thing is that we told the client that we have an internal risk register that we're not showing you. And this was part of the trust relationship to say, Mr. Client, you need to know that we are managing some things which matter to us, which we think don't matter to you. And they're internally, they're confidential. They're to do with our staff, with our processes, with our other projects that are none of your business. But we want you to know that we're managing these things and we're not going to tell you. And we expect you, Mr. Client, to be managing things on your side, which are none of our business, and we don't want you to tell us. But there are some things which matter to both of us on our project, and so we'll have a joint risk register. So I think it's very wise to have a joint risk register that's visible to everybody, and then a private risk register, which only matters to you, and for that to be visible and transparent. So not to give them the detail, but to say we have 5 red risks in our private risk register, just so you know, and we're dealing with them. Next month, we'll tell you we've got 4 red risks and one of them's now green, or we'll give you a kind of a progress report, but these are private and you need to know we're managing them. So that's a great idea, Alina, and I would recommend it, yes.
I'm just moving over to questions that our attendees have. Chris Schiebel, a guy I met recently for a coffee, when we still could do this. At the moment, I think we wouldn't do that. Yeah, he said, or he asks, what if risk likelihood increases with a growing number of people on planet Earth? That's a good question.
Does risk increase because we have more people on Earth?
Yes. Population growth. More people, more risks. Sounds
risk to what? So remember, risk is uncertainty that matters, and we have to think about what objectives we're thinking of. So if we're thinking about my project, it probably doesn't matter that there are 7 billion or 8 billion or 10 billion. It depends what my project is. But if we're thinking about the risks to, let's say, to the environment, or to water stability, water security, or food security, or to national security, there's a whole dimension of risk which is called human security, which is a subset of national security, and says that the people aspects on the planet are a more important contributor to national security than weapons and terrorism and politics. So these are things to be taken into account at an appropriate level. So for most of us, it's not a risk that we need to consider because it doesn't matter to our own objectives, but it matters to somebody's objectives. So yes, it's an increase in risk to somebody.
If you have a very long-running project, power plant or something like that, it could be a risk to consider.
It could be, yes. And then, of course, I mean, there are risks for the development aid agencies, for the World Food Programme, the World Health Organization. You know, all of those people have to manage risks which are certainly driven by global population. And so migration, numbers are driven by population. As I say, food security and starvation and famines and so on are all driven. Poverty, global poverty, oppression of women, children, all of these things are related to population in some way. So if your objectives are to address those things, as some of the global development issues are, if we think about the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainability Development Goals, those things are all threatened by population, certainly. Yes. But for most of us, we're not responsible for those things. So yes, it's of interest, but it's not, we can't manage those things at our level. Somebody else has to do that. Mm-hmm.
It's not project risk. Mm-hmm. MT Nguyen, the name sounds Vietnamese, I think, asks, what is the difference of risk management in a democratic country and a dictatorship?
What a wonderful question.
Yeah.
Are we talking about management of risk for a project business?
I think
because all of us then have a context within which we operate. We have a regulatory context, we have a political context, we have a legal framework, we have commercial conditions, and these are set by the government. So democracy or dictatorship are styles of government which end up in regulations or laws or commercial frameworks within which the businesses have to operate. So this is a non-negotiable. We all have to keep the law. We all have to meet the regulations. We all have to do what our governments, we have to pay our taxes. We don't have a choice about these things. So I don't think that increases or decreases or changes the way that we manage risk. These are just constraints that we have to take account of. And so we always have to keep the law, whether the law comes from a dictator or whether it comes from a democratic parliament. We all have to do that. We have regulations that we have to meet. We have taxes that we have to pay. And the context within which we work is part of our business environment. So I don't think risk management is different. It has different constraints, but the objectives will still be the same.
I think it's different. You have in a democracy, you have free press. So if you're looking for a contractor for a certain product you want to buy, or if you are approached by a customer and you ask yourself, do I really want to make business with this specific customers? Do we want to send an offer? Do we want to send a proposal, bid, and so on? In a democracy, it is likely that you will find a lot of information about this organization. You will find press releases and reports and people complaining about that and so on. In a dictatorship, it is much more likely that you will not find the information that you need to make such a decision. So I think there is a difference. And another thing is that dictatorship, in most cases, comes with corruption. And corruption is also an aspect of project business, an aspect we dislike. Most of us, at least, dislike it. Yeah, but it's there, and we have to accept that it's there, and we have to deal with that. And there is more corruption in dictatorships than in democracies. Yeah. So I think it makes a difference. Yeah.
But you see, because you say it's there, what that tells us is it's not an uncertainty. It's a constraint. Right? It's a fact of life. It's a fact of doing business in this particular national context.
Yeah,
and so it's not a risk.
Yeah. It's an uncertainty for me. Who am I going to deal with? If I enter a contract with this organization, who will I be in business with? Yeah, I think that's a difference. There's a difference.
Yes. Yes.
So,
yes, that's true.
But we don't have to have always the same opinion and the same.
No, of course not. No. That's where we make progress. There's a very famous saying, I think it was a man called William Wrigley in America, a businessman in the 1920s. He said, if two people agree, one of them is not necessary.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh,
I have one question for David, and you can continue with the Q&A. I saw in your website that you publish every year one book dedicated to the risk management, and there are 12 so far. Why is that? I'm very curious.
Well, I like to write, but I think the reason I'm still interested in risk management after nearly 40 years is because it's still developing. There are still new things we're learning, new risks are emerging, new processes, new techniques are being developed, new insights are coming along. And one of my privileges has been, as a thought leader, to be at that boundary of developing ideas and developing techniques and developing approaches to understand and manage new types of uncertainty that matter. And so what I can't manage all the risks in the world myself, and I should never try, but you guys can. And so one of my part of my purpose is to share my ideas as widely as possible so other people can pick them up and run with them and use them. And so I do that through my YouTube channel, through conference presentations, through my work, but also through writing. And so I try and write a book each year with something different, something new, something we haven't had before about risk management. And so all of my books cover different aspects of risk. There are books about risk psychology. There are books about risk in projects. There's books about operational and financial risk. There's all sorts of different types of book. And so what I'm just trying to do is to put my ideas out there so other people can take them and use them and improve on them and build on them. I wrote a book this year. It was published in September. It's this one here. It's a third edition of my methodology book, Practical Project Risk Management. And so the methodology is the ATOM methodology, Active Threat and Opportunity Management. So that came out this year, which is completely updated with new processes, some new techniques. I've just finished a manuscript for another book called Making Risky and Important Decisions. So talking about risky decision making at the leaders level, an executive leaders guide. My next book after that is going to be about corporate crisis. So these are all different types of risk management, which excite me, which interest me, which I think are important and people need to know about. And so my writing is really just a way of trying to put some ideas out there that other people might find useful. And details of all the books are on the website, of course.
Yeah.
And will you write a book on risk in project business management?
Yes, I should, shouldn't I? Yes, I will. Maybe we should write it together, Oliver. We'll co-author something.
Yeah.
And speaking of this, I have a question here from Ahmed Zohar. I think it's pronounced like this. Are there any new innovative risk tools besides the traditional risk register? What is your observation about this?
Yes, there are. The question is whether they are useful to you. So for most, we have a foundation level of tools. So things like brainstorming and assumptions analysis and Monte Carlo simulation and risk registers and those kind of base level techniques that really everybody would want to be using. Then there's another level of technique above that, which are applicable on large projects, complex projects, innovative projects. A particular industry perhaps might look at a particular type of technique. But what we're beginning to see now is borrowing techniques from other disciplines. So things like system dynamics, that kind of modeling of influences. We had an influence diagram before, but now putting system dynamics into the picture makes it much richer and more powerful. Looking at real options, the idea of real options for valuing different ways of thinking about the value of something. We can use real options for evaluating the effectiveness of our risk responses. The concept of risk efficiency. Risk efficiency was developed in 1957 by a guy called Harry Markowitz. He developed what we call modern portfolio theory for investment portfolios. And the idea is that in a balanced portfolio, you have some winners and some losers and some speculation. And then you drop out your losers, you move your speculative ones up into the winners category, and you keep balancing your portfolio. What we're doing with risk efficiency is taking the ideas of Markowitz for an investment portfolio and applying it into the management of portfolios of projects, which is a nice sort of new idea. Some of the concepts of risk psychology, behavioral literacy, which builds on emotional literacy, ways of understanding and managing our internal environment and building that out into our behavior. I think there's some really new insights there and some tools and techniques which will build on those things. So yes, there are at that kind of new level, most projects probably won't be using those routinely. But what happens is things that are new now will filter down, and in some period of time, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, they'll become common practice, whilst we're developing new things still that will be new now and then will be common practice later. So yeah, lots of innovation, lots of ideas. There's still lots of life and buzz in the risk management world, and I'm very pleased to see it. It's very exciting.
This leads me to the question by Ahmed Suhair. I hope I pronounce it correctly, Suhair. Are there any new innovative risk tools besides the traditional risk register and so forth?
No, that was the question I was answering, Oliver.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
At least I thought I answered it. I can answer it again if you think I need to say it all again.
No.
Properly the first
I just saw it. Yeah, I'm just going through this list. I cannot at the same time read and listen, so I didn't hear the question. Yes, okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, was a good answer because, yeah, let me do that again. What are your recommendations to cover all risk categories within a project? Does a risk prompt list or VUCA, i.e. predetermined list?
No. Okay, so
Mohammed,
I understand the question.
Mohammed Enas. Yep.
So a prompt list is one tool. A prompt list learns from the past. So if we had risks that happened before, we put them on our prompt list and we say, could it happen again? So that's useful, but it only looks at what happened before and asks, could it happen again? We also, so I would say, let me step back a little. When we're identifying risks, we need to look in 3 places: the past, the present, and the future. So the past, we have techniques like post-project reviews, like historical reviews, like prompt lists and checklists, which say this happened before, could it happen again? In the present, we need to be doing things like contract reviews, documentation reviews, looking at the constraints and assumptions in our business plan, looking at our resource limitations, looking at the early warning signals within our environment, within our organization. So we can say, what is here now that is causing uncertainty that could affect my project? So the past is my prompt list and checklist and post-project reviews. The present is my review of the existing documentation and environment and context within which I'm operating now. And then for the future, we need the creativity techniques. We need to imagine things that haven't yet been imagined. So brainstorming is the classic technique. But then other things like VUCA and using those kind of frameworks which say, don't forget to think about these areas without saying specifically what might be in them. Think about variability, think about volatility, if you like, ambiguity, complexity. Think about these areas and then be creative in the way that you think about them. So yes, I think we need to have that kind of 3-dimensional view, past, present, and future, when we're identifying risks. I would use the risk breakdown structure as a prompt list to help you think about the future. So when we said there are 4 main categories: management, technical, commercial, and external, you can then brainstorm under each of those categories and say, well, what management risks could affect this particular part of my project business? What commercial risks, what technical risks, what external risks are there? And use that as a framework. The frameworks are useful, but we still have to be creative within them. So yes, no, and yes. No prompt lists are not the whole answer, but yes, they are part of the answer.
You know, Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, he once said, past can be understood, but the future must be lived.
Yes, you live it one moment at a time, but we can also imagine the future before we live it. And part of the risk management challenge, that risk radar, is to imagine what could be. And if what could be is bad and unwelcome, let's do what we can to stop it. But if what could be is welcome and the sort of thing we want, then let's go out of our way to create it. And so I think imagination, to me, imagination is a time machine. You do time travel in your imagination. You can go into the future and live there and see what it's like to be in the future. And then you work backwards from the future to say, how can I get to there where I've just imagined? And that's a very powerful way of identifying how to manage risk going forwards.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us example of a black swan?
Well, in the past, there are lots of them. I think the internet was a good example of a black swan. So the black swan is something which was unimaginable until it happened, and it had a big impact. There are three characteristics: unimaginable before it happens, big impact when it does happen, and appears to have been predictable with hindsight. So we think we should have seen it coming. So the whole idea of the internet, that you can find anything at the touch of a button, we can search all of the databases in the universe in microseconds, in the world. Sorry, I'm getting carried away here. Who could have imagined that? I think the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of communism in the late 80s was unforeseen. In hindsight, we could have imagined it. Who would have thought the reunification of Germany was possible in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s? Did you ever imagine that? It was unimaginable. There was always capitalism and communism. It always would be, it always was. And so it was a black swan. Here's a question. Is COVID a black swan?
Yes.
No. Because it was entirely predictable, right? The black swan that's happened to us this year is global lockdown. Nobody imagined global lockdown. In February, I was with my wife in South Africa when the first cases of COVID started to happen. And in March, China had a lockdown in the Wuhan region, in that province. And I said, that's okay for China. That could never happen anywhere else. And then we had cases in northern Italy. And I said to my wife, they can lock down China, but they'll never lock down Italy. You couldn't do it in a democracy, in a European country. It's not possible. And then they did. And now we've all had lockdowns and we've all been confined to our houses, not able to travel, not able to meet people, doing this kind of meeting. Who could have imagined that 12 months ago? Unimaginable. But national lockdown and the banning of international travel was a black swan.
Yes. And
it's happened. So I think there have been lots of them. There's an old example from the 70s with the internet, a more modern, right up to date one with global lockdown. Who knows what the next one will be? We can't tell because it's unpredictable.
One interesting question, more like example here from MT Gwen. Is Donald Trump a black swan for the US?
He was, absolutely. In 2016 or 2015, I guess, during the election, nobody thought he would win. It was impossible. He was crazy. Of course, either he won't get the nomination for the Republican Party or Hillary Clinton is a shoo-in because she's a Clinton, because she's a standard, a proper politician. Nobody imagined it, and then it happened. So he was a black swan. Absolutely. I'm convinced of that. And so was Brexit.
Yeah, the Brexit.
Sorry to have said the word, but I've said it. Who imagined it?
I don't even imagine, even after they published the results from the vote about the Brexit.
Yes, exactly.
This small percentage of people who say, yes, we leave. And when they start to negotiating with the European Union that they will actually go out from the European Union, I still can't believe that they will go out from the European Union. And yes, they're out now. Almost.
We are. Don't say they. It's me.
Yes, you are. Sorry, you are. Because I'm on the other side, so was Oliver.
Of course.
Yep.
Oliver, do you have some interesting questions?
I'm just checking. There are some comments like truly amazing, excellent webinar. Thank you to everyone who writes that. The only problem is you have to find the questions between all these very positive comments, the questions that we can go on. Ahmed Zuhair again says, I like black swans, but not the metaphor of the black swan theory.
Yeah, it was of its time. I think for us in the West, it makes sense because we always knew as a certain fact that all swans were white because you only get black swans in Australia and New Zealand. And when we didn't discover Australia and New Zealand, There was no, so it was inconceivable that we could have a big bird that lives on the water with a long neck that wasn't white. All swans are white. If it's not white, it's not a swan. So the idea that you discover something which was inconceivable, but really all along it existed, that's the concept of the black swan. Of course, in Australia, they call those unpredictable, unknowable things white swans, because in Australia, all the swans are black, at least they used to be.
Yeah.
But yes, it's just a metaphor, and it's to get us thinking about a category of uncertainty.
It's evolution. Evolution is unpredictable. It doesn't follow a clear path. Sometimes can go two paths at the same time. By the way, what I have here is my elephant in the room, which is, I think, a close relative of the black swan. People don't talk about risks, maybe because they are afraid of risks. Managers don't talk about risks because when they tell their shareholders that they have risks in the organization, the share may go down. So that's always elephant in the room, and I have one here.
And is there a black elephant, which is a cross between an elephant and a black swan?
Maybe I need a swan with tusks, or I don't know.
Big ears.
Yeah, with big ears. Yeah.
I have one question because you see the positive feedback from our audience and the interesting things that you share with us. Where our audience can find more about your ideas? What are your channels of communication, so saying?
I have two. So, and they're old-fashioned. So my two channels are the website, risk-doctor.com. So risk, and then a little dash, risk-doctor, risk-doctor.com. And then on YouTube, I have 180 videos on the YouTube channel. The name of the channel is Risk Doctor Video, all one word. So there's 180 videos, 10,000 subscribers, over 1 million hits, and everything is free. You don't have to subscribe to anything. There's a playlist called 100 Risk Questions, 5 to 7 minute shorts answering all the common questions that start with a really easy question like what is risk, and then ends up with some really complicated ideas around real options or artificial intelligence or national culture. And it goes from the very, very easy to the very difficult. And you can drop into the series of 100 questions depending on where you start. Yeah. There's interviews, there's webinars. So Risk Doctor Video on the YouTube channel, and risk-doctor.com is the website.
What we can do is you give us the links, the access links, and we will send them to the audience here so that they can just use the links.
Yes,
for that.
I see Ahmed.
Have to write it down.
Yes.
So we will send it over. Someone answers here. Ahmed answers, just subscribed. Yeah, that's nice.
Thank you.
Just another question. Nothing to do with risk management, but please tell us PDU code, Central. There is no PDU code because the Project Business Foundation is not a registered education provider and no PMI chapter. So we cannot issue a code. But if you use this interview here, this session here for claiming PDUs, and if PMI comes back and asks you for evidence, just tell us. We have the list of the participants here, so we can confirm that you were a participant of this session here. So that's something we can do for you. Yeah.
And also, can you open a little bit more window towards your future work? What are you working at the moment? You mentioned a few topics.
I'm just going to write in the to all the attendees the website, which is riskdoctor.com, just so they can find that. And then YouTube. It's funny, isn't it, when you're trying to type quickly? Risk Doctor Video. So those are the two web addresses that you'll need.
Very good.
So what am I doing in the future? I mentioned about the other books. So I'm thinking about risky decision making. I'm also working on a corporate crisis. My next thinking about after I've worked on corporate crisis is to think about risky parenting, about bringing up children as a risk transfer exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that when you have a baby, you manage all of the risks for your baby. If you don't manage the risks for your baby, the baby dies.
Yes.
It's entirely dependent on you. When your child gets to some age, 18, 20, 40, then they're independent and can look after themselves and manage all their own risks. How do you get from this to this? And is there a risk transfer pathway that we can think about of transferring responsibility for managing safety risk, financial risk, relational risk, career risk, health risk, all of those different types of risk? And how can parents intentionally transfer risk ownership to their children? That's what I'm currently thinking about, which is rather different from project business, but probably as important.
And certainty that matters. You can use it here as well.
I will, of course. It matters. You can use it everywhere. I'm also thinking about national security and doing some work with a couple of African countries, which I'm not able to disclose more detail, but thinking about that human security element of national security and trying to build a risk-based approach to that. So.
Very good. By the way, our next session here, our next interview will be very near to that. We will have a talk with an expert on cyber risk, and we will talk about cyber risks, cyber threats in your language probably. There is no opportunity there, I think. There are cyber threats when you have this interface between two or more organizations, which can also be an entry point for malware and for people with bad intentions. Yeah. So how to manage that? That's a very important part of project business management as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, before we close our session, because we are near to the end, David, do you have something in mind to tell to our audience, to share with us?
Yes. Let me tell you that managing risk is the most important thing you can do. The reason is because we plan to succeed, and the only thing that takes us away from our plan is unmanaged risk. If you could see and manage all of your risks effectively in advance, you would succeed every time. So there is a direct correlation between your ability to manage risk and your ability to succeed. So of course you have to be competent in all the normal things, but the one thing that will make a difference between success and failure is your ability to manage risk. Whether it be personal risk, whether it be project risk or professional risk or business risk, it's the most important thing you can do. So please make sure you do it well.
Marcus,
have nothing to add to this.
Marcus Udokang, I hope I pronounce it correctly, asks, Dr. Hillson, are you on LinkedIn?
No, I don't use LinkedIn. And the reason is because it became a one-way street. I was asked lots and lots of questions and always giving, and I never particularly received anything very helpful. So I'm very sorry you can't find me on LinkedIn.
Yes, yes. We had this discussion before, but you didn't give me an explanation. Now I have the explanation too. Yeah.
Maybe you can read the Edward Odek question. How do we manage risk management in public-private partnership?
Yeah, that's another. That was the next interesting one. Yeah, Edward Odek.
Well, I think the PPP, the public-private partnership,
yes,
arrangement is set up explicitly to manage to share risk. And we were talking about this early on in our discussion about the idea of risk sharing across the interface and being transparent about it and valuing it. And so in the way that the PPP is set up, the way that the contracts are defined, risk is explicitly stated on both sides of the interface. So then what we have to do is, well, there's a number of things. One is we have to be certain to manage the risks that are on our side. So we have to absolutely take care of those which we have taken responsibility for on our side of the partnership. but we also need confidence that the other side is managing their risk. And Oliver mentioned the word trust, and that is key there. But another factor is not just trust, but communication. So risk communication, the ability to talk about uncertainty, a language with which to express things that we're not sure about, is very important. And so when we're going across the PPP and we say, you know, I was quite uncertain about it, but now I'm more certain, people might not like that kind of language. But if we say, well, there was a 40% chance it was going to happen, and now there's a 60% chance of a good thing, a good outcome, and therefore I'm more confident. Again, how do we justify that kind of language? I think the key in managing across the interface in a PPP and developing trust is not only managing risk effectively on our side, but agreeing a language that we can use, a common language across the interface between the client and the contractor, so that when things happen, either side, we can speak with one voice and know what we're talking about. So I think the standard risk management approaches are important, but more important than that is trust and communication across the boundary.
That's a very interesting point. We are at the moment in development of a glossary, a project business management glossary, something that has in this form never existed. And it started as a simple document, and the discussions with lots of people around it, including people from a lawyer's office and some others. It's getting so complex meanwhile, but it's so important to do that. And to what degree can we be authoritative with such a document? To what degree do we have to accept that there are some ambiguities in language and so on? I think we shouldn't accept too many ambiguities, because that's always the threat of misunderstandings. And one of the big things is avoiding misunderstandings. We cannot tell people what to do, but we can tell them how to use words, or give them a baseline if they want to use them differently, that they can say, we have a delta to that baseline. And even that's then easier to understand it. That's exactly what we are working on at the moment. That's our big project at the moment. And the next project is already in the pipeline. So that's,
I think the concept of defining a word and saying, this is how most people will understand it, but if you want to use it differently, that's fine, as long as you define the difference. I think that's very wise, because who has the authority to say, how a word should be used? Yeah,
but this means you need a baseline to describe that. You need a starting point. And then you can say, no, that's not our definition. We use another one, and that's 100% okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good.
So I don't want to break this very interesting discussion, but we are going very slow to the end. And I would like to give the honor to Oliver to close this session. Oliver?
Yeah, just reading, reading another thing which is quite interesting. Sorry, I'd like to come up with one more question, because this question is a very good question. Edward Odek again. Thank you so much. Risk Doctor, risk management is becoming a nightmare in large infrastructure contract agreement witnessed within this pandemic period. Quite insightful. Not sure if this is a question. I think it's more a statement.
Yeah, observation more like.
Yeah.
Well, this means that we have a lot of people today. Yeah,
but it's interesting that people come back and say, we have these problems. This is relevant for us. We talk about things here, the three of us, that are relevant for others, and we can get some feedback from them and use it also in our discussion.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you, David, for your preparation to join us. It was a big pleasure. It was a very interesting discussion we had here, and I think to have a focal person with that insight and with this knowledge on uncertainty, that's a very big thing. And I think you did a lot for the Project Business Foundation and for our audience as well. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, and I wish you continued success with Project Business Foundation. I think You're filling a gap that is really important, and there are many project-based organizations that execute their business through projects that need that kind of support and place to go in order to find how to do better. So it's been great. I very much enjoyed our conversation, and I wish you continued success. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope to see you again in the near future here with us.
Yes, absolutely.
And Stan, thank you for taking Martin's place. Private things.
No problem.
Uncertainties in the family. Great. Thank you very much. And everyone else, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.